Which teams belong in the Premier League? Now, the football season might be over for another year, and we now know who is going to be playing in what leagues next season. But as a casual football fan, I always think at this time of year, which teams actually belong in what leagues? Now, I know things are always changing, teams come and go all the time as form fades away, but there's certainly some teams that belong in certain leagues, and it wouldn't feel the same without them if they got relegated. Whereas other teams, when they get promoted, it's like a little holiday for them. So I got way too invested in the stats. I've made a massive spreadsheet, I've made actually several spreadsheets, and I've worked out once and for all which 20 teams belong in the Premier League. I feel like this is going to irritate a lot of fans, obviously. So the Premier League started in 1992, so that means there's been 34 seasons. And it all began when the big teams broke off from the old First Division because they wanted a bit of TV money. Eventually, they were joined by 22 teams in total. Here they are on the screen. Lovely. But that only lasted a few years before we went down to the 20 teams that we know and love today. But of course, that 20-team roster is always changing, and in total, 51 teams have played in the Premier League. So a lot of them have stayed the same. So it should be an easy task. It's not. It's not been. Nowadays, 20 teams compete in the league each season, with 3 getting relegated at the end of it, and obviously 3 coming up from the Championship. So there's a churn at the bottom. So which teams actually make the cut? Let's get into it. First of all, hello, I'm Joe Dewey, stand-up comedian, part-time football fan, full-time nerd. I've dug into the data, I've made a massive spreadsheet, and I've ranked all 51 teams who've ever played in the Premier League based on how much they deserve to be there. So what am I judging on? Well, there's 3 main criteria: performance, history, and clout. First and foremost, it's performance. How many seasons have you played in the league? If you play in the league, you belong in the league. But of course, I think more recent history should count for a little bit more than ancient history, right? If you played in the league in the last 10 years, that should be a bit more important than if you played in the league in the first 10 years and then dropped out and never came back. Looking at you, Sheffield Wednesday, you don't deserve it as much as, say, Bournemouth. So I've added a recency bias to my table, so you get more points if you played in season 34 than if you played in season 2. So what does this mean? It means we've got a new table. This isn't just a list of how many seasons each team has played since 1992. We've got a weighted score, which means that more recent seasons count for a little bit more, which I think gives a bit of a fairer picture. Rounding out the performance metrics, we've got the all-time points record, although I think this has less weight because I think it's more important if you're like mid-table minnows every season versus like coming up, having a bunch of good seasons and then just dropping off again. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And finally, we're including Premier League titles. If you've joined that pantheon of Premier League title winners, surely that's got to count for something. But obviously there's other things to consider, like history. Some clubs have a storied history and a stacked trophy cabinet that people were bragging about to their comrades in the trenches of World War I. Whenever these kind of clubs get promoted, it's like a reunion with an old friend. It's like meeting Red on the beach of Shawshank Redemption. Except sometimes the group dynamics kind of shifted. We're in a new era now, and it's a bit embarrassing to be associated with you, actually. Third, we've got clout. Now, this is a bit more vibes-based, I suppose, and it's based around the age-old debate of what constitutes a big club. But let's face it, some teams just have a Premier League vibe. They've got a big stadium, they've got a global following, they represent a cosmopolitan global city rather than a backwater 2-bit town. Maybe they have a great kit or a great logo, or even a fierce rivalry with an undisputed Premier League titan. Because if we are creating the definitive Premier League and pulling up the drawbridge on this thing, we want to preserve some of the derbies. Don't get too excited, Derby. I'll let you know if you've made the cut. Let's get some teams on the table. At the top, we've got the big boys. It's the big 6. Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Tottenham, Man United and Man City. These guys were the founder members of the Premier League, and they basically are the league. If they weren't happy, they could break away and form their own league, which they did in 1992 to make the Premier League. These guys are all ever present in the league, and it wouldn't feel the same without them. I know Tottenham's had a bit of a wobble last couple of years, but let's face it, a lot of the worries around them possibly getting relegated is because we'd lose something if we lost them from the Premier League. We'd lose the North London derby, we wouldn't lose many trophies, but we'd lose something. I should also say, I know Man City have had a couple of wobbles over the years. They haven't featured in every single Premier League, but they've been absolutely dominant for the last 10 years, and you'd be being very petty to not let them in. In 7th place, it's Everton. Everton, yeah, they're always there, aren't they? They've got to be here, because they're always in it. They don't win anything or do anything interesting, but Everton. Next up, we've got a category I like to call the wobblers. They've had a little wobble. They've dropped out of the Premier League from time to time, but you know what? They've dusted themselves off every time, and they've clawed their way back up to the top, because that's where they belong. They are 8, 9 and 10 on the all-time points record, and they're all above 30-plus seasons in the Premier League. They are Aston Villa, West Ham, and Newcastle United. I know West Ham's just been relegated, but I'm telling you, they'll be back. Next up, we have what I like to call my mid-table warriors. Now, these 4 teams, I think, absolutely deserve their place on the Premier League, just on seasons alone, and also all-time points record. Their history doesn't need to come into it, although they do have a pretty decent history. In 11th place, 11th in the all-time points record, and in terms of number of seasons, with 25 seasons in the Prem, is Southampton. I know these guys have had a wobble recently, and in recent history they've even been as low as League One, but I think they absolutely deserve their place in the Premier League. They might not have won anything pretty much ever, but they've got 42 seasons in the top flight to back their history up, and they're always there or thereabouts, and I think they deserve their place. Next up, we're deviating from the all-time points records with the 14th all-time point scorers and 18 seasons in the Prem. It's Leicester City. These guys are always there or thereabouts. They've either been in the Premiership or the Championship throughout their history. They've never had any spells in the doldrums of the lower leagues. But obviously what seals their Premier League position is their title win in 2016. I know they won it as sort of crazy upstarts who are like, these Championship idiots aren't supposed to win, they're supposed to go to the richer teams. But come on, they've won. They're in that pantheon and they absolutely deserve their place in the Premier League. After that, it's the team at 16th in the all-time points record, with 17 seasons in the Prem, and one of the longest unbroken streaks in the top flight. They've been in the Prem since 2013, it's Crystal Palace. Now they're there just on performance alone, but they also have a good history. They were sort of nowhere until the late 1950s, and then they came up and they've been Championship or Prem ever since. But it's not so much history as vibes that seal their place, because I just think Crystal Palace, what a great name for a football team. And the fact that they got this great eagle logo on top of the Crystal Palace, and they're called the Eagles. The Eagles, what a brilliant name. Come on. They've just got that little bit of aura that bumps them up and absolutely seals their place in the Premier League. Finally, rounding out our series of mid-table warriors is a team who's had 20 seasons in the Premier League and is at 15th in the all-time points record. It's Fulham. Now, these guys historically weren't really anywhere. They had a little stint in the top flight in the 50s, and then they were absolutely in the doldrums for the rest of that until the 90s. Then, at the turn of the millennium, they turned themselves around, and they've been solidly Premier League ever since. They've had a couple of wobbles, but 20 seasons in the Premier League is undisputed, and I think they've dominated this century as a Premier League team. They've also got some famous fans, of course, Michael Jackson, Richard Osman. They got a bit of clout about them, and that's why they belong in the Premier League. Now it gets even more debatable, and we can't allocate teams based on performance alone. History has to come into it. So these next 3 teams are my historical legends. They might not have the performance record in recent years to back it up, but their history brings them forward. First up, these guys only have 15 seasons in the Prem, but they're 13th in the all-time points record. It's Leeds United. Now, these guys were absolutely dominant in the 60s and 70s. They won a bunch of leagues, and then they dropped off in the 90s. But now they're kind of back, and I think they're back where they belong. They've also got a fierce rivalry with Man United, who used to be good when they were good. And Leeds is a massive city. It's 6th largest in the UK, and I think they deserve to be represented in the Premier League. Next up is a team with 17 years in the Premier League and 17th in the all-time points record. It's Sunderland. Now, these guys have the most patchy history, I think, of recent years. They've been down as far as League One. But if you look back, they've basically been in the Premier League most of their career up to the 50s. Then they've had a couple of blips every now and again. But they're generally a Premier League team, and they belong, I think, in the Premier League. But the real reason they belong in the Premier League is their titles. They're 7th in the all-time titles list. That's crazy. They also have a bit of clout as well. I think calling your stadium the Stadium of Light, that's pure Prem. And finally, they also have a rivalry with Newcastle that I'd like to preserve, so I'm keeping them in. My next historical legend is a team that's 20th in the all-time points record with 12 seasons in the Prem, but they have a massive history. It's Wolves. These guys also get a recency bias because they spent the last decade in the Premier League. I know they've just dropped out, but they have a massive history of being in the top flight. 64 seasons in total, from the 1880s until sort of World War One, and then from World War Two right up until the late 80s when they dropped off. But the reason their history brings them through is they're title winners, they've won all sorts of trophies, and I also think they've got a bit of clout about them. Their nickname Wolves, their little hexagonal logo, and the fact they play at Molineux. Having a one-word stadium title is pure Premier League. It's not called Poxy Lane or Bumhole Road. Molineux. We've arrived. Before we do the final 3, the promoted teams if you will, I just want to say a few words about all the teams I've rejected, so the rest of the 51. If you're a fan of one of these teams, you're probably screaming at the screen right now like, where's my team? Why haven't they shown up yet? I'll tell you why, it's because they suck. We get it, your team's got a lot of history, but that's in the past now. Get over it. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. So these are teams that won stuff back in the day, they have a great history, but at some point they dropped out of the Premier League and they never really reclaimed their status. First up is Middlesbrough. These guys have been in and out of the top flight since they started as a team, and they were a founder member of the Premier League. They were immediately relegated, and they've been solidly out of the Prem since 2009. They've had 16 seasons in the Premier League, and they're 18th in the all-time points record, but guess what? It's over for you guys. Then we've got Ipswich Town. They were a founder member of the Premier League, but they just couldn't hack it at the top level. They're kind of like known as like the farmers because they're rural. Ipswich Town. It just doesn't have Premier League vibes. Next up, we've got Wimbledon. They were solidly in the Premier League for the first 10 years, but then they had a bit of a meltdown, moved to Milton Keynes, and now we don't talk about them anymore. Then we've got Coventry City. These guys are coming back next year, so I thought I'd mention them. These guys were in the Premier League solidly until the early 2000s. Then they plummeted down to the doldrums of the lower leagues, and they've only just clawed their way back. They do have a lot of history, though, so maybe if they establish themselves again in 10 years, we'll chat. Now, there's two historical legends I think I've been a little bit mean to. One is Blackburn Rovers. I'm sorry if you're a Blackburn fan. They are 13th in the all-time points record, and they won the Premier League in 1995. But that was 30 years ago now. You haven't been in the Premier League since 2012, and Pixie Lott was in the charts. I know Blackburn's got a big history. They won the league back in 1913. They won FA Cups in the 1880s, but they were solidly sort of Division 2 or 3 for most of the middle 20th century. And it was only when Jack Walker bought the club, his boyhood club, in the late 80s, spent 100 million of his own money, and then they eventually shot up, and then they won the league in 1995. But if you buy peak Alan Shearer, that is going to happen. So they won the league, and then he basically immediately died. Not Alan Shearer, Jack Walker. And then they never really recovered. They just faded away into obscurity, left the league in 2012, and they haven't been back since. That's why I can't put them in the Premier League, because it just feels like a blip. The second team that's hard done by is Nottingham Forest. I know they have a huge history, back-to-back European Cup wins, and they're back in the Prem now. But unfortunately, they just don't have the Premier League record to back it up. 24th in the all-time points record and 9 seasons in the Prem. It's just not enough to bring them through. And also, they have no clout. Historically, their record is really similar to Leeds. They were big in the 60s, 70s, 80s, dropped off in the 90s, and now they're sort of back. But unfortunately, Nottingham is such a B-tier town. Nottingham is nothing. Their ground is just called the City Ground. It's just like the blank stadium you play on FIFA. And they're not even called Nottingham City. They're called Nottingham Forest, like it's 1066. That just screams championship. Also, their biggest derby is with, well, Derby. That's the most championship fixture on the planet. Now we've got the honourable mentions out of the way, and before I announce the final 3, it's time to address the rest of the rejects. These fall into 3 main categories. The first category is championship chances. These are guys who lucked out into a berth in the Premier League, got absolutely eaten alive, dropped out straight away. These are your Blackpools, your Lutons, your Barnsleys. They've got no performance record, no history, and no clout. They're bringing up the rear. Next up are what I'm calling the tourists. These guys had a long, lovely spell in the Premier League, perhaps even a successful one, but then they dropped out of the league and balance was restored, and they snapped back to reality and dropped into lower league obscurity, and absolutely nobody cared. These are your Wigan Athletics, your Swanseas, your Stokes. They came up, had 10 years, they saw the sights, God, they had a good time, and then they dropped out back to where they belong. There is a subcategory here of what I'm calling future tourists. These are teams that are currently still on their holidays now, and I think they will be dropping out in the future. These are the Bees, Brentford, Bournemouth and Brighton. They're doing well in the Premier League, but they've just got no history. Between them, all 3 of these teams only have 15 seasons in the old top flight. If they continue to establish themselves in the Premier League, maybe we'll have a talk then. But for now, they've just not got enough clout to belong in the Premier League. And here we are, the final 3 teams, the promoted upstarts. These plucky young things might be your second team for the year, and you really hope they do well, but you know they're probably not going to. I've had to abandon the stats a little bit here, but I think belonging is a feeling. You know, these teams just fit. In 18th position, it's a team with a huge history. They could almost be classed as historical legends, but they just don't have the Premier League credentials to back it up. And that is a team with 13 seasons in the Prem, 21st in the all-time points record, West Bromwich Albion. These guys were one of the top teams from the 1880s all the way to the late 1980s. Then they dipped off, but I think they've been in the Prem enough to say they're a Prem team. They might not be in the Prem now, but I know they'll be back to claim their rightful place in the Premier League. In 19th place, another classic yo-yo club with a huge history to back it up. 56 seasons in the top flight, 2 league wins, 5 spells in the Premier League since 2009. It's Burnley. They might only be the 30th in the all-time points record, and they only have 10 seasons in the Prem, but they're all since 2009, so they have a bit of a recency bias there. And I just feel like that Sean Dyche era of like, oh yeah, Burnley, they're always coming up, they're going down again, but they're coming up, do you know what I mean? And I think they feel to me like they belong in the Premier League. 20th and final place in our definitive Premier League is on an absolute knife edge. It really depends on how you skew the stats. If you value history, it's going to be Blackburn. If you value modern performance in the Premier League, it's probably going to be Brighton. But if you're like me and you value that true yo-yo club spirit, it's got to go to the ultimate yo-yo club. This team has been promoted a record 6 times. They were a founding member of the Premier League back in 1992, and in that first inaugural season, they came 3rd. It's Norwich City. They might only be 27th in the all-time points record, and they might only have 10 seasons in the Prem, but they are the ultimate yo-yo club for me, and I just think it wouldn't be right to not include them. And if you don't think so, well...
Let's be having you! Come on!
And that's it. That's the full lineup for the definitive Premier League. If your team made it, congratulations. If your team didn't, I'm afraid they suck. If you want to know anything about the stats I use, or you want to look at the spreadsheet, I'll sort of put it up here. But also comment and I'll probably send it to you. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video and there's anything else you think I should research, let me know. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.